Hey everyone, Tanner here, and I've got a mini complete aquarium. I'm sure you've seen these going around the web set up as aquascaped aquariums, but probably not as a paludarium. So I decided that I wanted to turn one of these into a fully functioning mini paludarium. Let's get right into it. First things first, I tested the tank just to see how it worked. This was important because we'll have to modify it later on. After testing the tank and gaining a better understanding of how it works, I cut out a little piece of paper to use as a guide. I'll be using this guide to account for the 45-degree angle created by the overflow. My vision is to create a waterfall of sorts using slate stone. The pieces that I have are fairly large, so naturally I broke them up into smaller pieces with the hammer. Afterward, I used the guide from earlier to score the slate with a fine-toothed saw. Then I clamped the stones to my work table and cut along the scored lines. After cutting each stone, I ran them along sandpaper to create cleaner edges. I did this for upwards of 20 stones until I had enough to create a substantial waterfall. As you would expect, this was pretty time consuming, but I think it was worth the effort. With the stones cut to shape, they were stacked up to create a nice rocky cliff for the water to cascade down. Once I was pleased with the arrangement, I removed the stones and placed them into a clamp so that I could retain this aesthetic. From there I put all the stones back into the aquarium, only this time I glued them together with some gel super glue. One by one I stacked up all of the stones until I got the look that I previously had. Then I let them sit for around 10 minutes so that the glue could dry. Once I felt that the glue was dry enough, I removed the entire structure so that I could add the detail work. Removed from the tank, you can probably now get a better idea of why I cut the stones to shape. Anyways, as is, the structure looks a little unnatural because most of the stones are the same size. To create a more natural look, I wedged and glued scrap pieces of stone into all of the nooks and crannies of the main structure. The majority didn't need glued, but there were a few pesky sections that called for it. From there I placed it into the tank and proceeded to create a few other landforms. Since these ones won't be a part of the waterfall, I didn't care if they were cut at the perfect angle like the stones from earlier. With the general idea of what I wanted, I removed these from the tank and glued them together like I did previously. Now that I've determined my layout, these items could all be attached to the inside of the tank using some silicone. For the waterfall structure, silicone was applied to the three sides and the bottom. Then it was placed firmly into the tank. Next, a dab of silicone was applied to the bottom of the two smaller structures, which were then placed into the tank. Lastly, I applied a bit of silicone to the top of the waterfall and smoothed it out with a toothpick. At this point, the tank can finally be modified. To do so, I put a piece of masking tape on the back side of the tank to indicate where I wanted the new overflow to go. Since this will be a paludarium, I only want the tank to be about half full of water once it's up and running. Using the masking tape as a guide, I first marked the acrylic with the standard drill bit, and then made the actual hole with the step drill bit. With the rockwork in place and the overflow accounted for, I used some more silicone to attach a few sheets of cocoa fiber liner to the sides of the tank. Once they are firmly stuck in place, I put dabs of super glue in various locations and covered the super glue with cocoa fiber. This will create more texture and help soften the edges of the rockwork, making it look like they are actually part of the background. As you can see, it now looks like a seamless transition from the stones to the rest of the background. From there, I finalized the setup with a few manzanita twigs. This will really help bring everything together and make the design more cohesive. As you would expect, I glued each of the pieces into the tank so that they would stay in place. My goal was to combine several small pieces together so that they looked like a single piece. I wanted it to look almost like the roots of a tree stretching down into the water. Once all of the pieces were in the tank, I covered a few sections with glue, which were then concealed with cocoa fiber. I did this to make the twigs better blend into the background. Now it's finally time to add the plants. What I've got here is some Bucephalandra wavy green, Anubias nana petite, badge moss, and java moss. The first plant that I added was an Anubias. I knew where I wanted it right away, so I glued a few of its roots onto the driftwood. After that, I did the same for a few Bucephalandra. Then I glued several patches of java moss in locations that I felt would promote the best spread of growth. I don't care if I start with lush patches of moss, but I can get there over time by placing moss in strategic locations as such. Once I got the tank mostly planted, I added my substrate layer, which is simply a few mixed colors of sand. I chose sand because it will help retain the sense of scale going on in this setup. From there, I filled up the tank with some water to get an idea of how it was going to look shortly. With the tank filled up, I added small pieces of slate stones to accent the water feature and to help bring the design full circle. Lastly, I planted some patches of badge moss in the water feature. This moss was a great choice because it will grow well in a riparian setting, and the upright, leafy appearance makes it look like another plant instead of just another moss. At this point, the tank can finally be set up to run. I filled up the sump, put the tank on top, and turned on the filter. The waterfall would look fine as is, but I covered up the return with a few stones so that it looked a bit cleaner. From there, I put the lid on the tank and covered up the opening so that I could retain the humidity. Lastly, the light can be put on top of the aquarium. It has 3 levels of brightness, and I think the middle brightness looks best for this setup. Now that you've seen the final product, it's time to put this on the nano shelf. My first impression of this tank is that I like how it turned out, but I might make a few modifications down the road. I really want to see how it fills in before I do anything though. I'm gonna try to be patient though and not do anything until it grows in a little bit. I especially can't wait for the badge moss to take off. Once it begins to grow up and out of the water, I think it will really pull the design together. My biggest complaint with the setup though is the waterfall. Don't get me wrong, the rock work looks great, but I wish that the water flowed more vigorously. I do have several ideas in mind to get it flowing better, but I'll save that for a future video. All in all though, I think this was a really fun project. Like everything I do, give it some time and it will look even better. I will say that my original vision for this setup was a little different from the final product seen here, but some things that I wanted to do just weren't practical at this small of a scale, and I really wanted to retain the functionality of this aquarium. After all, that's what I think makes it so cool. Although it is quite small, it does work pretty well. If you're interested in nano builds like you just saw, be sure to subscribe and join the Serpa squad if you're not already a part of it, because I got a lot more nano builds coming up in the future. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this one because I was really excited to share it with you.